This is Land of Havilah, Isaiah 56. The first two verses are easy to understand. Verse 1. Yahweh says, maintain justice and do what is right, for my salvation is near, and my righteousness will soon be revealed. Blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who holds it fast, who keeps the Sabbath without profaning it, and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Comment in verse 2, Yahweh says, keep the Sabbath. In the Old Covenant, God told Israel to keep the Sabbath, of course, Exodus 20, verse 8. Moving forward to the New Covenant, in which we now operate, Paul told believers to keep the Sabbath or not, according to individual conscience, Romans 14, 1-12. We should talk about elements of Mosaic law, such as the Sabbath being present in the millennium. It's going to be relevant in this chapter. In the millennium, there'll be a resurgence of the law of Moses, or at least some aspects of it. For example, in Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48, there'll be a millennial temple, and there'll be animal sacrifices there, Ezekiel 43, 18-27. The idea of animal sacrifices in the millennium might throw Christians for a loop because we understand that Jesus made the final atoning sacrifice, Hebrews 10, 10-18. But thinking about it a little further, Hebrews also says that Jesus made the only atoning sacrifice, that the blood of bulls and goats had no possibility of removing sin, Hebrews 4:10. So if animal sacrifices aren't sufficient for atonement, what were the Old Testament sacrifices of the past all about? And what will the millennial sacrifices of the future be about? Why perform them? In answer, the Old Testament sacrifices bore witness to what Jesus would do, and millennial sacrifices will bear witness to what Jesus already did. The sacrifices of the past and future are commemorative, in other words. Commemoration was part of it, plus the sacrifices were atoning in the Old Testament, assuming the participant brought his sacrifice in faith. The participant's faith saved him, and the atoning sacrifice of Jesus saved him, which would be in the future, but the animal itself did not save him. But also about the law of Moses being present in the millennium, besides Ezekiel chapters 40 to 46, which describes a millennial temple with the Levitical priesthood and animal sacrifices and observation of Old Testament feasts, new moons, and Sabbaths. There's also Zechariah 14:16 that says the Feast of Tabernacles will be kept in the millennial age. Isaiah 66:21 says Yahweh will select priests and Levites from the nations to serve during the millennium at the temple. Malachi 3:2-3 says when Yahweh comes in the days of his presence, Levites will give offerings in the temple. Micah 4:2 says the law will go out of Zion. It doesn't say the law of Moses particularly. It could be some other law going out of Zion, but there will be law in the millennium. Going on, Yahweh has a word for foreigners and eunuchs. Possibly they experienced discrimination in the social life of Israel, but Yahweh will not discriminate against them. Verse 3. Let no foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh speak, saying, Yahweh will surely separate me from his people. Do not let the eunuch say, Behold, I'm a dry tree. For Yahweh says, To the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, and choose the things that please me, and hold fast to my covenant, I'll give them in my house and within my walls a memorial and a name better than of sons and daughters. I'll give them an everlasting name that will not be cut off. Also the foreigners who join themselves to Yahweh to serve him and to love Yahweh's name, to be his servants, everyone who keeps the Sabbath from profaning it and holds fast my covenant, I'll bring these to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all peoples. The Lord Yahweh, who gathers the outcasts of Israel, says, I will yet gather others to him in addition to his own who are gathered. Comment in verses 3-8, Let no foreigner say, Surely Yahweh will separate me from his people. And don't let the eunuch say, Behold, I'm a dry tree. The point is that Yahweh will not discriminate against foreigners or eunuchs. If they join themselves to Yahweh, they're full-fledged. Of course, a eunuch may feel he has no stake in the future because he has no children, but Yahweh will bring them into his house and within his walls and give them a memorial and a name which will be better than having sons and daughters, which meant their lack of children won't be relevant in the ages to come, and their lack of honor and recognition in the present age will be recompensed in the age to come. And there are others besides foreigners and eunuchs who may feel they're left out, but that's never the case. Anyone who holds fast to Yahweh's covenant is in. Yahweh will bring them all to his holy mountain in verse 7, which is a promise that they'll participate in the millennium. They'll give burnt offerings and sacrifices on his altar in the millennium in verse 7. Jesus quoted the end of verse 7, "My house will be called a house of prayer for all peoples," which continues the non-discriminatory theme of this chapter. In verse 8, he'll gather the outcast of Israel, or the dispersed of Israel, around the world. That much is abundantly clear everywhere we look in millennial prophecy. All Israel is in. But be advised, he says, he'll gather others in addition. They'll even serve as priests and Levites, Isaiah 66:21. Verses 3 to 8 focused on the lower end of the social ladder, who thought they might be left out. And the last 4 verses coming up, the top end of the social ladder better watch out if they're unfaithful. Verse 9, "All you animals of the field come to devour, all you animals in the forest. His watchmen are blind. They're all without knowledge. They're all mute dogs. They can't bark, dreaming, lying down, loving to slumber. Yes, the dogs are greedy. They can never have enough. They're shepherds who can't understand. They've all turned to their own way, each one to his gain from every quarter. Come, say they, I'll get wine, and we'll fill ourselves with strong drink, and tomorrow will be as today, great beyond measure." Comment in verses 9 to 12, speaking of Israel's leaders, the watchmen are blind. The leaders have no spiritual vision. They don't see Yahweh's approaching wrath. They aren't sounding the alarm like dogs that can't bark. They're distracted with personal gain in verse 11. They're confident in verse 12 and see no reason to keep sober in verse 12. Their duty to Yahweh is nowhere on the radar. So in the first part of the chapter, the outcasts are in better shape than they think, and in the last part of the chapter, the leaders are in worse shape than they think. Isaiah 57 is next.